Hanging in there?
Yeah.
Right on. I'm Bill Hemmer on a Friday. Good morning, everybody. Manafort's defense team right now insisting that they are, quote, in the game. This after the jury had 4 key questions for the judge late yesterday, most notably on the definition of reasonable doubt. Defense lawyers calling this a good sign for Manafort, who has pleaded not guilty to tax evasion and bank fraud. We caution you, it is very difficult to read between the lines on what jurors want to know with these questions. Peter Ducey knows that live and well. Alexandria, Virginia, good morning to you. Have we heard from the Manafort defense team yet today, Peter?
We have, Bill. They just came by and said they think the longer the jury is in there, the better.
Do you view the continued deliberations as a good sign for the defense?
It's a great sign for the defense. Thank you.
Judge Ellis said a verdict could be coming soon. Do you think that will be today, Mr. Gunner?
I don't know.
The judge said this morning he's optimistic that the Manafort case might end soon with some kind of a verdict, but before it does, he's going to have a hearing about releasing some parts of the proceedings that have been under seal. The judge's plan all along has been to do that eventually. He said this morning, quote, everything that's been under seal with one exception will be unsealed at the end of the case, but a group of news organizations, including the AP, New York Times, and Washington Post, just filed a motion to intervene. They want to know what has been happening out of earshot of the press, including a session earlier this week where the entire morning remains under seal.
Any
Bill?
questions from jurors today at all?
Not yet, but late yesterday, right before they went home, the jury asked the judge to redefine reasonable doubt, which is key because they're instructed to only convict Manafort if they don't have any kind of reasonable doubt that he is guilty. The jury also asked the judge to help them understand 2 terms that were central to the Mueller team's arguments concerning shelf companies and foreign bank account reports. Those are terms the jurors would have heard hundreds of times from the Mueller team for weeks. But after a full day of deliberating, not everybody in the jury room apparently knew what they meant. One thing that the jury does not have is a deadline. This judge has been riding the Mueller team, or at least he was for weeks, to speed things up. But he told the jury this morning before they went in for day 2 of deliberations that they can go for as little or as long as they want.
Thank you, Peter. We're watching that along with you. Peter Ducey, Alexandria, Virginia, across town. You saw the live picture there. Andrews Air Force Base, the president now climbing into Air Force One. Well, he'll take a pretty short hop, about 40 minutes of flying time, up to Southampton, New York, out on the east end of Long Island. And you can raise some money out there, Sandra, this time of year. A lot of folks out there with some cash.
He'll be landing at West Hampton, headed to Southampton, arrive at a private residence, and then he will participate in a round table with supporters there and give remarks at a luncheon. So we will follow the president's movements there. Meanwhile, for more on the Manafort trial, let's bring in Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace. Good morning to you, Chris.
Morning to you, Sandra.
All right, so the last words that we just heard on the Paul Manafort trial from the president was this: Paul Manafort trial, very sad day for our country, very sad what they have done to Paul Manafort, says the president just moments ago.
You know, as I heard that, I thought, boy, if we really have changed. I'm not sure it's for the better. I remember Richard Nixon back in the 60s, early 70s, talking about the Manson trial. Charles Manson, not somebody who many people had doubts about. The president weighed in on his guilt, and people went nuts. I remember Barack Obama weighing in on Trayvon Martin, or the Henry Louis Gates in Cambridge weighing in on those, and people went nuts. The idea that a president would in any way intervene in a trial. You have now with Paul Manafort, the jury is considering the case, and the president basically saying it's sad that the prosecution was even brought against this man who was a former, briefly, top advisor, campaign chairman for President Trump. How things have changed.
So we'll see what happens with that today. Of course, those jurors had those 4 questions last evening. Deliberations are underway today. We'll see if there is a verdict. Chris Wallace. Meanwhile, the president just weighing in a few moments ago as well on John Brennan's security clearance being revoked. He said he's had a tremendous response for doing that. He said he's never respected him. He went on to say what the fate of Bruce Orr may be. He's called him a disgrace and said he suspects his clearance will be taken away quickly.
Well, a couple of things there. I thought the most interesting thing he said about John Brennan is somebody mentioned, because some of the people who've been objecting have said that this abridges his or violates his freedom of speech. He said, what are you talking about? He's got a bigger platform. A lot of people who didn't even know who he was now know who he was and how much he liked having his voice out there. And a lot of people have suggested that, you know, this president likes to create his foils. He's gone after Maxine Waters, said she's the leader of the Democratic Party. Now he's, in effect, trying to appoint John Brennan as one of the leaders of the resistance. So he takes people that he thinks are a good contrast for him and tries to anoint them as the voice of the opposition. I thought it was interesting that he would, in effect, admit that when it came to John Brennan. As far as Bruce Orr is concerned and removing his security clearance, last time I checked, the president could fire Bruce Orr, who's just an official at the Justice Department. I'm surprised he hasn't done so, and one could argue he has a legitimate reason to do so, given Bruce Orr's involvement, his wife's involvement. His wife was an employee of Fusion GPS, which is the company that hired Christopher Steele, who wrote that dossier in the first place. So I don't know why he's fooling around with a security clearance. If he thinks what he did was wrong, why not fire him?
Well, he didn't necessarily rule that out. He did go on to say that Orr is a disgrace to Mueller, and he said Mueller is conflicted. Tons of conflicts. This whole thing is a rigged witch hunt, the president said a few moments ago. But 12 former top intelligence officials have criticized the president for pulling Brennan's security clearance. So possibly Bruce Orr is next. Do you suspect there may be more of those Obama-era officials?
Well, the president certainly has left that out there. And in fact, when Sarah Huckabee Sanders on Wednesday specifically announced that they were pulling Brennan's clearance, she mentioned a number of other Obama administration officials, some of them connected to the Russia investigation, some of them not. The officials who came out today, it was about a dozen former CIA directors and former defense officials. Robert Gates, who was the defense secretary for George W. Bush and then also for Barack Obama, part of that group. And in effect, what they said is, look, it's one thing if you're trying to protect security, if the information, if there was any evidence that John Brennan had misused classified information, but he said this seems to be a political act, not a security act, and that's what they objected to. So, you know, we'll see whether or not the president goes after any of those other folks. He certainly has the right to remove security clearances. But it is curious that all the people he's talking about removing their security clearances are critics of his, people that have opposed him, spoken out, none of them as nakedly political as John Brennan. He's not talking about removing the security clearances of former officials who have praised him or remained silent.
All right. Chris Wallace, thank you very much for your time this morning, getting cut a little bit short because of the president.